Hello everybody, hello, hey, hi, hello, welcome back. My name is Katie. Today's mug we have Very Merry, which coincidentally is probably not how this video is gonna go. Today I thought I would take the leap and talk about some books that I really did not like that I read in 2020. Quick disclaimer here, these are books that I personally read in 2020 that weren't my favorite. Not all of these books necessarily came out in the year 2020. I actually only have 5 books to talk about today. I was really lucky in the fact that 2020 was an excellent reading year for me. I'm actually planning a favorite books of 2020 all wrapped up with my reading stats for 2020, and that should be coming next week. So I'll talk all about how overall my reading year went in that video. But today I just wanted to talk about the worst books of 2020, my least favorite reads of 2020. First up is actually the first book that I read in 2020. Unfortunately, it was one of my least favorite books of the year, and that is The Girls by Emma Cline. This takes place in the late 1960s in Northern California. We follow our main character, who is a high schooler. She's a young teen that kind of gets enthralled by this Charles Manson-like family cult, and we follow her leaving her family behind, kind of getting ingratiated in this cult, as well as some of the not so great things that happen while she's in this cult. I ended up giving this a 2 out of 5 stars. I had a few big problems with it. The first being that this is literally, as far as I could tell, the Charles Manson family story, just fictionalized, which if I want to read about the Charles Manson family, I'll read Helter Skelter or something nonfiction. I just felt like she pulled way too heavily from the story, and maybe that was the point, maybe that's why people enjoyed it. Because the author drew so heavily from that story, I found this mystery thriller to be extremely predictable. I knew exactly where we were going at a certain point. I knew exactly what was going to happen, and it just did not satisfy me in a way that I think it would have if there was a more original or twist on that cult-like family story set in the 1960s. I also feel like the main character that we followed, even though the story does explore themes of acceptance and sort of why she was drawn to these people in this cult, even though they were living like hippies basically, you know, a dirt floor, sleeping on the floor, it's a big family, everyone has sex with each other. Our main character was kind of the most boring of the group. In my opinion, I think it would have been a little more compelling if we had followed one of the other characters with a different backstory that may have been pushed too far in this cult and actually committed acts of violence and explored the repercussions of that. Based on the synopsis, I might give Emma Cline another go if she writes another book, but because this was based off such an extremely well-known popular, for lack of a better term, event that happened in real life, I just didn't take as much away from this book that I wanted to. All right, next is probably maybe my most controversial opinion on this list, and that is Maybe in Another Life by Taylor Jenkins Reid. I want it to be known that I have read The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo and Daisy Jones and the Six before I picked up Maybe in Another Life, but Maybe in Another Life was written before those two, and you can definitely tell, at least in my opinion, that Taylor Jenkins Reid hasn't hit her stride with storytelling yet at this point. The premise of this is actually pretty interesting. We follow our main character who has kind of hit a rut in her life. So she decides to pick up and move from, I think she's in New York at the beginning, and move to Los Angeles, back to where her absolute 100% best friend is, and start over. But she's 26 and feeling like her life hasn't really started yet. So she's looking for a change to kind of shake things up and see where her life goes from there. On her first night back in Los Angeles, she runs into her high school boyfriend, an old flame. Basically, they were in love once, and she's faced with a choice to either leave with her best friend or go with this guy for the night. And so told in alternating chapters, I believe it's pretty consistent alternating chapters, we see how her life would have turned out based off of these two decisions. I do think this is pretty interesting based on the butterfly effect, like one choice can change the course of your life forever. However, I don't think this story was compelling enough to carry two separate storylines. I don't think this book was bad by any means. I gave it 2.5 stars, which for me is average, like right down the middle. But coming off of reading Daisy Jones and Evelyn Hugo, which I both loved and adored and gave 5 stars, this one fell a little bit flat for me. Overall, the characters were relatively bland, especially compared to the vibrancy that I believe TJR brings to her characters in her later works. I don't feel like the two storylines were different enough to be invested in both of them. I definitely had a preference of where the story went down one line, and that made me not really enjoy half of the book as much. I just feel like the premise was great, and maybe if TJR waited a little longer in her writing career to write this, it would have come out a little bit better. But I still like Taylor Jenkins Reid, and I will be picking up the rest of her works. This one was just a miss for me. Okay, the next one I have right here behind me, and that is Out of Love by Hazel Hayes. I gave this a 2 out of 5 stars. Hazel Hayes is a very popular YouTuber here on the platform who makes a lot of content around film and filmmaking, behind the scenes, that sort of stuff. And I used to be heavily invested in her content probably in around 2016 when she was still doing these long form time of the month vlogs. I still really like that series. I'll link it down below if you're interested. Hazel is a very interesting personality, and so is her group of friends. So when she announced in, I think 2016 or 2017, that she was going to do a Kickstarter kind of novel, I went ahead and backed it. My name is actually in the back of the book, which is kind of cool, and this book is signed, which is really nice. I don't watch a lot of Hazel's content anymore. She doesn't really do a lot of content on YouTube anymore, but I still wanted to support her and pick this book up when it finally came out 3 years after I backed the book. The whole premise of this book is that we are starting with the breakup of this couple and going backwards to when they first meet. Really interesting premise here. I did really think that this is a unique thing for a novel. It's not something I had ever heard before, and I was excited to see what was going to come out of this book. However, this book frustrated me to no end. I first and foremost think that Hazel is a very talented writer. There is some merit in her writing ability. However, this book suffered from what I consider to be a self-insert problem. There were a lot of similarities between Hazel and the main character, and it was really hard to get Hazel out of your head while you were reading this novel, and that's just not something that I want to experience in a work of fiction. As much as I like Hazel, it felt really weird to read her kind of write herself into the page. There are passages in this book that are really breathtaking, and there are kernels of writing that is absolutely incredible. However, Hazel makes some narrative choices that I just do not really understand. I think there were a lot of different options she could have gone with the book, and this wasn't really it. To counteract that beautiful prose, there are some very clunky sentences and also phrases like "not insignificant hips," which I don't know what that means. It just feels weird to say that and to read it, and it definitely, stuff like that takes you out of the novel and just kind of confuses you. By far the best part of this book is the raw interpretation and translation of anxiety onto the page. I think that's when Hazel really shines, when the main character is getting vulnerable about their insecurities and their anxieties. Overall, I think I am willing to give Hazel another try just to see, since she's gotten this sort of self-insert out of her system, to see if she can write another novel and really wow me, especially with the kernels that were there that I think are really excellent. But this one was a disappointment for sure. Next on here we have Come Tumbling Down by Seanan McGuire. This is the 5th book in the Wayward Children series, of which up until this point I have been enjoying. However, in this book, we go back to this place called the Moors, this world, and I am just sick of being there, to be honest with you. I know a lot of people love this land and really enjoyed this installment, but I felt like this installment in this series was pretty pointless, to be honest. I didn't see the need why we had to go back to this land. I thought we wrapped up the Moors actually pretty nicely previously, and just thematically with the rest of the books, I don't know. I didn't feel like it packed as much of a punch. I also felt like this book dragged on, which it's tiny. The series are novellas. They're like 150 pages each, and I found myself being like, oh my gosh, when is this gonna end? So that is just my personal preference. I do really enjoy the Wayward Children series. I think this installment was just a dud for me. I ended up giving it a 2 out of 5 stars. I will be continuing on with this series because I do enjoy Seanan McGuire's writing, and I think this series in general is really unique to what's happening in the fantasy genre right now. These shorter novella portal fantasies I love, but I just wasn't a fan of Come Tumbling Down. I'm sick of the Moors. I'm over it. I'm ready to move on. And the last book on here is not so much a bad book, but it is a disappointing read for me. That is The Last Book on the Left by Marcus Parks, Henry Zabrowski, and Ben Kissel. This book was written by very famed podcasters from the last podcast on the left, and we are following 10 serial killers. We kind of get their perspectives and humor towards these horrific situations. Last Podcast on the Left is kind of a cheeky humor podcast surrounding true crime, unsolved mysteries, supernatural, that sort of stuff. I am a casual listener. I don't listen to every single episode, but sometimes I do go on binges. If you haven't heard of them before, approach with caution. They can be a little crude sometimes, and it's like 3 guys joking about murder, which might not be everybody's cup of tea. Sometimes I do enjoy it, and I do listen to some of their conspiracy ones too. It's a fun time, but go into it with tentative expectations because I don't think they're for everyone, especially if you don't like some crude humor, which sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. Sometimes I have to turn their voices off because they get kind of nuts. But I did listen to the audiobook of this because I thought it was just going to be like listening to one of their podcasts where they're like snappy, witty, and it wasn't like that at all. I don't know why I was expecting, but it was read like a audiobook should be read. I mean, I'm not faulting the people who made the audiobook or the authors for this. It's mostly my expectations, hence disappointing. It just felt to me like the jokes didn't land as much as they should have because they were read in this very serious audiobook way. So that was a little bit frustrating. I also think it was kind of low-hanging fruit for these guys to pick 10 of the most well-known serial killers and write short snippets about them, especially because they do have podcast episodes, a lot of the times multiple podcast episodes on each of these people, that I think it would have been more interesting for them to delve into something a little bit different so that we were seeing something similar to their podcast content but different, so that it was more compelling when you picked it up. And it was just, I just wanted to see something a little different. I thought it was just a little bit too much of a low-hanging fruit, not quite a cash grab, because I know they worked really hard on it and the book is supposed to have really great illustrations and stuff, but I was disappointed. And I think that will do it for me for my least favorite books of 2020. Let me know what your least favorite books of the year were down in the comments, and if you had a good year like me, or if you read, unfortunately, more disappointing reads. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, give it a thumbs up. Also, YouTube has been unsubscribing me from channels that I know I've subscribed to, so if you don't mind, check to see that you're subscribed, and if you're not, just click that subscribe button. You don't have to if you don't want to, but I've been noticing this myself, so I just want to make sure everyone's aware, and I hope you have a good day. I'll see you next time. Bye!